Hey, I'm Rhett Shull. Welcome to my second channel. This video is my long-form interview with Jon Gundry from ThroBak Pickups. If you haven't caught my original video, What is the P.A.F sound? You can check it out here or down below, but I'm assuming you found this video from that one, so we'll just get straight into the interview. This one's for all the guitar nerds out there, all the pickup nerds. Jon goes into some crazy detail about PAFs and how they're made and why he started making them and what he looks for in PAFs. This was a really fun interview to do, so I hope you enjoy it. But before we get into it, check out the links in the description box down below. You can check out links to ThroBak and to Jon's stuff, as well as some other things that I've got going on. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump into the interview.
So you started off with the pedal thing, and then you moved into pickups, and around what time was this? Because you said there's some other boutique builders out there. Who else was doing it?
Well, I had been doing pickups just as a hobby for quite a few years, but in about 2007, 2008, I started shifting. ThroBak started as a company in 2001. And through that period, I had been making pickups on my own, selling them to friends. But around, I think it's about 2006, 2007, I decided, well, I'm going to make a concerted effort to concentrate on the P.A.F style pickup. At the time, a P.A.F generally, if you were to get a boutique P.A.F, it would be a hand-wound P.A.F, hand-wound P.A.F clone. And I knew enough to know that this was actually not the way a vintage P.A.F was made, that they were all machine wound. So I decided at that point I wanted to concentrate on making a P.A.F that was machine wound, as accurate in materials, construction, and winding as possible. So that is where I started.
So can you talk for a second about how the original PAFs were made, like the construction of them, what made them special?
Yeah. So through that, and through doing repairs and kind of destroying some of my own vintage stuff to dissect it and kind of figure out how it worked as far as variations in how things were wound, variations in magnets, variations in metal chemistry. I had parts lab tested. But a vintage PAF is basically, they're all going to be machine wound. And that has an effect on the microphonic quality of the pickup, the treble response of it. And beyond that, there's lots of little parts and pieces to the assembly of it that individually have a small effect, but cumulatively have a fairly large effect on the tone of the pickup. So at the time, there was, if you were to be a small boutique maker, you would basically buy from the same bucket of parts that all other makers had available to them. So pretty early on, I decided I'm going to systematically go through and reproduce each component in the US using details like carbon content of the steel, actually sending magnets in, vintage magnets into U.S. magnet manufacturers and to have those duplicated as well.
Wow.
So systematically, I went through each part and piece of a PAF. My background too as a hobbyist is I've made violins.
Oh, wow.
A hobby for years. My grandfather made violins. And as far as violin making goes, it's sort of the ultimate as far as geeky details go. Everybody wants to produce a Stradivari. So, but doing that sort of work, you recognize that the process of making it has a huge impact on the final tone of the violin.
Right.
So my thinking with doing a repro is that a big part of the final sound of it has to do with the materials and the method by which it was manufactured.
Interesting. So when you look at what Gibson was doing in, I guess, 57 through 59, 60 with regards to the PAF and then later the patent number humbuckers, the early PAFs, what went into an early PAF in terms of materials and magnets and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, a PAF really, the design is an adaptation of a P90. So they use the same magnet. A P90 has two of the same size magnet, whereas PAF has one. But both of them essentially have the same number of turns of 42 gauge plain enamel wire. And both of them use the same magnet, same style pull screws, except a PAF now has slugs as well. But those parts with a PAF are basically an adaptation for a humbucking design of a P90. So the very first PAFs, my feeling is, and there's evidence for this based upon the machines I have, that those very early ones were wound with P90 machines adapted to wind PAFs. So the very first ones tend to be a lower resistance because the machine in which they were wound for P90s was, which I have one of them, is only capable of making a pickup that would top out at about 7.5, 7.7K.
Got it.
The very earliest ones are going to be, you'd be hard pressed to find one much hotter than that.
And so at the time, you had the winding machines there in Kalamazoo, and when you say hand wound, I'm assuming you mean that there was an operator sitting at the machine, literally winding the pickup as the bobbin was spinning around.
Well, P90s were machine wound.
Okay.
So if you have a 1952 P90, those are machine wound pickups.
Got it.
So let's say you have a 52 Les Paul. It's got P90s. These are machine wound pickups. Gibson did hand wind pickups earlier than that, but being a factory, they want the most efficient way to make them, and eventually that's you're going to get an automated coil winder. So those machines that Gibson used for P90s, they made the design of the PAF compatible with their winding machines that they had for P90s.
Got it.
And as that timeline progresses from early PAFs to early patent stickers, they start using progressively more efficient machines. These progressively more efficient machines allow for a hotter pickup because they will distribute the wire more accurately and more evenly than their earlier machines.
Got it.
And part of this, because my initial strategy in how I was going to make repro was, hey, what would happen if I could get the actual machines that they used?
Right.
This seems like a very long shot to do, but I've managed to get two of the machines actually were used in the factory. So, but one of those machines is a very early machine that Gibson purchased, I believe, in 1950. I've got the record for it. And it has all of the fixtures still on it, all of the gearing. And so that machine was initially purchased for P90s. And you can see from just the fixtures on it that they ran both P90 and PAF bobbins because it has little imprint from the bobbins on the fixtures.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But from that machine, they specifically set the machine up so it would be foolproof for the user. And from a strictly production standpoint, it made sense, but it had all of these changes had an impact on the sound of the pickup. I don't know that Gibson was really thinking about it in these terms. Hey, we're going to change it because we want them to sound, we'll change how the machine is set up because we want it to sound a little different. I think they were just looking very simply at it as far as, hey, we need to make these efficiently with as few mistakes as possible. And the more bobbins we can put on the machine, the better. So as the timeline goes on, you can see evidence from the machines. Once you own the machines, you can see there are quirks about the wire distribution and the turn per layer of each machine that when repairing them, I can tell what machine it was wound on.
Wow.
But all those subtle variations in how they were wound affects the sound of the finished pickup.
That's amazing. So when you're winding your pickups, you're winding them on the actual machines that.
Yeah, it's either the actual machine from the factory. I have 2 machines that are actually from the Gibson factory documented, or the exact same model, vintage model machine that they use. So basically, there are 3 different, let me think of it in my head here. There's 3 different pickup machine winding, coil winding machines that they used. No, actually, there's there's 4. And I've got all 4. I kind of have to think about it for a second. But there's subtle variations between those 4 that affects how tight the coil is, what the wire pitch is when the coil is wound. And it's just one of those components that affects the finished sound of the pickup.
So how would you describe the P.A.F. sound? If I were to ask you, just overall, what is the P.A.F. sound?
Yeah. I'll kind of compare it to a P90 because since they have similar construction, there are similarities if you're playing very clean in a recorded environment, you might have a hard time picking out with equivalent guitars which is which if it's just clean. But compared to a P90, a P.A.F. has a bit more dynamic range from low to high. And clarity and dynamic range is kind of a hallmark of a P.A.F. P90s are great, and they're kind of their own thing, though. And you begin to notice this more with a more distorted tone. P90s, the low end, you start to notice it more in the low end, becomes compressed much quicker than a P.A.F. will. And you have just a little bit more depth for pick dynamics with a P.A.F. than you do with a P90 when it's distorted.
Got it.
This is having tested these back and forth and trying to describe the difference to customers. That's kind of at the core what I can tell is the difference. The other is since P.A.F. and P90s for that matter are machine wound, plus they're not wax potted. You have treble overtones from the good acoustic feedback from the guitar that come mechanically through the pickup, and that translates for the player. I think it translates into just more touch sensitivity and better dynamic feel to the guitar. Some of it you hear is treble overtones. I've done a video on comparing waxed and non-wax potted. In a recording, it's not as obvious.
Yeah.
But I think for the player, there is a real feel difference, and you feel you're getting a little bit more response from the guitar. And since they are machine wound, you have a more consistently packed bobbin. So a lot of that, more of that acoustic transmission through the mechanical body of the pickup comes through to the player than if it were hand wound.
So it really is acting, when people say microphonic, I mean, it really is acting like a microphone in the guitar, picking up everything that's happening.
Yeah, because you can get, some people are annoyed by it, that you can tap on the cover and you're going to hear it very easily. But so there's maybe a trade-off as far as that goes, but it does translate to you're getting some of the acoustic properties of the wood of the guitar, which presumably are a big part of why you chose the guitar.
Yeah, right. So one thing I've always heard about P.A.Fs in respect to bursts, so 59 and 60 Les Pauls, is that every set or every pickup pretty much had its own character and its own unique sound. So when you're talking about buying a modern recreation of a PAF, you kind of have to figure out, well, which PAF were they going for? Is that true?
Well, yeah, to some extent that's true, because they do wear very widely. I believe they were, it seems to, so if you pick up a vintage guitar that's got PAFs in it, you will almost certainly notice the difference between the character of the pickups in one guitar and another guitar with vintage PAFs. So it seems random. I think what the reality is it's a bit of a progression through the timeline of when these were made that comes out to, well, these vary widely, but there's sort of like a progression of phases in which components like magnets changed. Because if you look at vintage magnets, you can tell just physically by looking at them that they are made by different magnet manufacturers. And with that also comes variation in what magnet would be in the pickup. So it could be Alnico 2, could be Alnico 4, could be Alnico 5, could be unoriented Alnico 5, could be, in very rare cases, Alnico 3. All of these will affect not only the perceived strength of the pickup, but it'll also, the difference in metal composition of the magnet affects what's called the inductance of the pickup. And just in sort of basic terms, I'd like to describe that as that change in inductance affects your perceived EQ of the pickup. So one magnet might give you more of a mid-dominant tone. Another one might give you a slightly scooped mid-tone, depending upon what's in the guitar. So that's a variable that varies quite a bit. Then you have the number of variations in the number of turns of the wire on the bobbins. That's a function partly of the machine, and actually I think really largely of the machine, because one of the machines, these machines, they were counted as far as the number of turns. They all had counters. 2 of them did not have auto stop counters. So you have the reality that the operator is not going to stop the machine at the same time every time they run them.
Interesting.
They're running 4 bobbins on one machine that doesn't have an auto stop counter. They're doing different tasks when the machine's going. It gets shut off when it gets shut off, more or less in the same window of, hey, It's got to be shut off at these number of turns, but it's not going to be a precise thing unless you were really, focused on the machine and the counter. And I don't think that's the case. Then you have that with machines that do have auto stop counters. And there's another variable that is kind of a difference between modern production and vintage production. And I explain this to customers frequently, but so the part of the lore of a vintage PAF is that the wire is different.
Right.
You have a difference in wire. Well, the way wire was different in the 50s is, and the way it's still different, is that different manufacturers will have wire that's perhaps a different ohms per foot just for the same size bare wire before a coating goes on it. And then, and that's a difference of manufacture. But in the 50s, you had, if you ordered 42 gauge plain enamel wire, which is what goes into a PAF, they would send you the full possibilities of size within the 42 gauge tolerance. And so there's variation. The 42 gauge tolerance is a difference in diameter of the wire and ohms per foot of the wire. Most pickup makers, when they order now, if you called to order plain enamel wire now, they would say, do you want min to nominal tolerance or nominal to maximum? So they now take the 42 gauge, they split it into 2 parts.
Right.
And almost every pickup maker uses min to nominal tolerance. And a boutique maker generally is going to be winding from 1 spool for each coil. And when that spool runs out, you replace it. it's much easier to keep consistent between coils by doing that.
Right.
A vintage PAF would have had this larger full tolerance, so you have a more of a random variation in size of the wire and ohms per foot, which will affect the resistance of the finished pickup and also how fat the coil is, which has an impact on the tone. So in modern times, you have most pickup makers ordering min to nominal, so you have this other random variation you had in the vintage that's not showing up in the modern. And so that's really this variation in wire size, diameter within the 42 gauge tolerance, and ohms per foot is what impacts the tone of a vintage PAF compared to most repros.
Right.
The way I handle it is that we order the full range of ohms per foot and outside diameter within the 42 gauge tolerance, and we sort the wire when we get it with micrometer and ohms per foot test, and then we assign it to specific winding stations. So that random variable we can make repeatable for specific models. So it would know this first station on Olisona 102 has wire of this size and ohms per foot. That's used for the screw coil of the DT102 and the SLE 101,
right,
as an example. And so I can build in this random variable that is part of a vintage PAF, but I can make it repeatable for each model. The effect it has tonally on the pickup is the imbalances between the coils, between the adjustable screw coil and the slug coil, is an opportunity to introduce overtones that are musical to the player.
Yeah.
This is sort of, I think, the concept of like when Gibson came out with burst buckers, they offsetted the turn count.
Yeah.
Strategically to try to optimize that. And that's part of a characteristic of a vintage PAF because of this difference in turn count, but it's more in depth than that because you have this variation in size of the wire and ohms per foot of the wire within the 42 gauge tolerance.
That's what's so fascinating to me is like you have gone back and figured this stuff out and figured out how to, to recreate that in a modern day. But back in the 50s, it was just a function of what was available at the time and trying to crank out as many pickups as they could. And in doing so, they kind of inherently stumbled upon this, it almost sounds like an accident in some way. Like they didn't realize at the time that what they were doing would be so highly sought after and iconic decades later.
Yeah, I think it's really a function of the process they used and what was available at the time for raw materials. Another example is that pole screws from adjustable pole screws from the 50s, if you go test one, they're going to have a much lower carbon content than if you just went to a screw manufacturer and said, hey, I need some Philister head pole screws for this application.
Right.
They're going to give you a higher carbon content. A vintage steel is lower carbon content for pole screws. And this is one of the details we have to duplicate in order to get the vintage spec. You have to specify the steel content. If you want to do that, basically, you have to buy 40,000 screws at a shot. So I have boxes of screws in 4 varieties to cover that variation.
Right.
And it's just one of these component pieces that, for whatever reason, in the vintage world, as far as manufacturing goes, the preferred available raw cold rolled steel was lower carbon content.
So
and higher now, generally.
So when you think about the PAF sound in terms of the players and the iconic records, you know, whether that be Zeppelin or you know, whoever, what to you is the epitome of like the PAF sound musically?
Yeah. Well, personally, and this is kind of a bit of an odd, I mean, this is for many people, this is the epitome of a PAF sound would be Peter Green. But the interesting part of that one is there's two parts of his tone that are not straight Gibson factory PAF tone. One is the out of phase middle position, and which did happen randomly with pickups coming out of Gibson. But the other is that the likelihood is, the neck pickup in the Peter Green's Les Paul was repaired. And there's lore as to what exactly happened there. I actually think I've got a good handle on it, having repaired or having made a Kossoff repro with the current owner of one of Paul Kossoff's guitars. But the repair on Peter Green's guitar was done by Sam Lee. And I've talked to people that were contemporaries of his, and part of the tone of that pickup is how that repair was done, which seems, so it's, although it seems like the quintessential PAF tone, it's actually a little different, but in the neck tone and in the out of phase middle position tone. But then another one would be, of course, I'd say early Page Les Paul tone with the double white bobbin exposed. That's a favorite of mine. And I would say, if you want to know the requests I get most often is what, based upon customers' feeling is the quintessential PAF tone, it's going to be Jimmy Page, Peter Green, Duane Allman, Dickie Betts, Paul Kossoff, Billy Gibbons.
Yeah.
So, and some of those, I think, what's interesting about all of those, they do all have the commonality of being very musical, expressive, and detailed treble tones when compared to, let's say, just if you had a humbucker with ceramic magnet.
Right.
A PAF style pickup is much more expressive to the player that knows how to take advantage of that.
Right. That's why they're my favorite. You know, I'm a huge P90 fan. To me, I've always thought of the P90 as like, if you're going to have one pickup to do everything, it's a P90, because it does you can do the single coil thing. You can do just on how you play it and attack it. It can do a humbucker thing. But for me, right neck and neck with a P90 is a good lower output PAF. Yeah. And what I've found in like a Les Paul or even a 335, the bridge pickup on a lower output, great sounding PAF can do kind of like a telly bridge thing. It can sort of become a chameleon of sorts depending on how you play it. And that's something that I've never been able to get out of a ceramic magnet humbucker. Like I had a 2001 Les Paul Custom that came with the 490 and 498T pickups. I think they are the real hot ceramic. And to me, those were the worst sounding pickups because they were way too high output. There was no touch sensitivity or dynamic. It just was like, blah, here's your sound, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So in terms of output, you know, you just listed off all of those players, and I have kind of a double-sided question with that. One, how much variance is there between Page's, you know, double cream uncovered PAFs versus Paul Kossoff's versus Duane Allman's? Yeah. I mean, are they vastly different from one another? And two, is it a difference in output, resistance, any of that kind of stuff?
Well, interestingly, the hotter is, and now hot for PAF is not actually particularly hot. So an hotter PAF, medium to higher output PAF would be something that's above 8.2K. So, but those hotter pickups, medium to hotter pickups, tend to be in 58 and 59, particularly 59. And that is one thing most of those players have in common. They're playing either a 58, 59 Les Paul. And so it's some of the specs I can find out, but the likelihood, like the Paul Kossoff's pickup is, I believe, 8K bridge and 8.6 neck. The Peter Green guitar is, I've been told, is 8.2K neck, 8.6K bridge. These would be medium to higher output pickups. These are not your typical lower output PAFs. Now, so that medium to higher output is going to give a little bit less headroom with the amp, but it's going to give a little bit more opportunity to drive the amp with pick attack. But if you're playing a cleaner, more articulate sound, a lower resistance is going to give you more headroom with the amp.
Right.
But it does seem that these hotter pickups do seem to be medium. I say hotter, medium to hotter pickups tend to be the ones associated with a kind of guitar hero. The guitar heroes we mentioned. Although interestingly, when Page's double cream goes bad, he replaces it with a T-top, which is going to be around 7.6, not going to probably be over 7.8K.
Right.
So, obviously the player is the most important part of that tone, but the higher resistance, I assume, has something to do, as far as from player standpoint. You have amplifiers that you want a distorted tone out of, but they're not necessarily designed to give you that distorted tone. A little hotter pickup is going to be able to push it with pick attack easier than a lower resistance one.
Right. And then when it comes to patent applied for versus patent number humbuckers, is there a big difference? Did they make a big shift whenever they finally got the patent, or are they all kind of the same?
Well, it's a transition. So later PAFs are going to, there's details of a later PAF that are going to be exactly the same as a very early patent sticker pickup. So once the sticker switches, it's not necessarily that you're good. They can be spec-wise exactly the same pickup. But that progression with a later PAF is you're going to have a short Alnico magnet that will be either short Alnico 2 or short Alnico 5. And when it goes to a patent sticker pickup, the specs really remain the same for a window, and then they progressively change. One of these specs with a vintage PAF, that if for people trying to spot if they have a patent sticker pickup, patent number pickup that is PAF spec, is whether or not the start wires are both, the start and finish wires are black. And if the cover is off, this is a detail that people who are looking for these things look for. But that's also an indication that they were wound in the same manner. The resistance, once you go to a patent sticker pickup, does drop pretty quickly, because they were paying more attention to what machine they were using for these things, and they were just winding them more efficiently, frankly.
Wow.
You get more variation early on, and kind of midway through the PAF era. I think largely as a function of their use of multiple machines to keep up capacity. As far as, they made many pickups, so they have multiple machines that are probably doing multiple jobs, and then by the time patent sticker pickups roll around, they've pretty much settled on what machines are going to be the most efficient in making humbucker pickup.
Got it.
So you have a more consistent resistance, and you also have a resistance that tends to be lower.
Got it. So what's your? I was looking on your website, and I want to know, because this is going to go into what pickups I decide to purchase. What's your favorite? What's your favorite one?
Now, so that's like asking what child is your favorite. The reality is I do not make anything I don't really love, but you can't really underestimate how important the guitar is to it. The reason I say this is, I mean, since I make them, I do have the luxury of swapping them out of different guitars, and I'm always surprised how one set might not be the right choice for one guitar, but another would be.
Yeah.
And the guitar will just come to life with a different pickup. So, but I have two guitars that I tend to kind of focus on if I'm going to play. And these, again, this is personal preference. But the SLE 101 Plus I have in a 52 to 57 conversion gold top, which is that one right there on the far, if you can see it, it's on my far left. And I have a blues band, and I like to play where I'm kind of on the edge of breakup, but I can clean it up with pick attack.
Yep.
And I like to play rhythm and sort of like accent lines on the neck pickup. That guitar with those pickups is a very detailed neck tone.
Right.
And it really works well for detailed low end in the neck pickup of any guitar. That's one of our biggest sellers. But the flip side of this is I have a 335 I tend to play a lot. And which is that one there. That's a 67 335 that I kind of resurrected it. I bought it with no pickups. And that has a set called the ER Custom set, which is a short Alnico 5 magnet PAF spec set. And that has more of a, whereas the SLE 101 Plus has more sort of center mid clarity to it.
Mm-hmm.
That has more sort of a lower mid chunk sound to it.
Got it.
And with the 335, it's already got a little bit of that anyway, but that kind of like makes it really bloom.
Yeah.
So for you or anybody that's looking at getting pickups of a P.A.F. style, there's two things I say. Well, I ask, like, do you have a preference as to, do you know whether you prefer a slightly more scooped mids tone or a little bit more mid prominent tone? That can kind of help point you into what magnet is the best choice. Alnico 2 is slightly scooped in comparison to Alnico 5 in a P.A.F. In the mids. So that would be one thing.
Yeah.
And then the other is, do you prefer a pickup that is going to hit the amp harder? Or do you want something that is clean headroom really important to you with the amp you're playing? So if you're playing a lower wattage amp, then you might want something that's below 8K, or not above 8.1K. And that'll give you just a bit more room to have a clean tone without pushing your amp too hard. So,
got it.
And those are personal preferences. Some people know, some people don't. But as far as our what sells consistently the most for us, it's the SLE 101 Plus, SLE 101, and the KZ115.
Got it.
So KZ115 is more of there are guitars, vintage guitars that have like your perfect typical matched set, which would be a bridge pickup that's a higher resistance than the neck pickup.
Right.
And that's a typical balance set. But a lot of guitars that came out of Gibson had a hotter resistance neck pickup than the bridge pickup. Our KZ115 set is like that. That's one of our sets where it's offset, kind of flip-flopped the offset as far as resistance.
Right.
And it's well within the adjustment for pickup height to balance them out.
Yeah. Nice.
But if that's what you want, that's one of them. So.
This has been fantastic.
Okay.
I've learned a ton, and it's clear you know a thing or two about pickups and what goes into them.
Once again, huge thanks to Jon for taking the time out of his day to talk about PAF pickups with me. Like I said, be sure to check out the links in the description box down below. Go follow them on YouTube and check out their pickups if you're in the market. I'm about to buy a set for my Les Paul from them. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know by leaving a comment down below, and subscribe here to Rhett Shull too. This is my sort of it's like the junk drawer in your kitchen, except it's a YouTube channel. It exists solely for videos like this. So if you want to see more stuff like this, let me know in the comment section down below. And who knows? It might happen. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. My name is Rhett Shull, and remember, there is no plan B.